The rope bit into Eleanor Hartley's wrists, long before she understood why she had been dragged from the coaching inn at midnight. But she understood it now, standing barefoot in the mud of a forest clearing, while 3 men argued over whether to gag her. "She's the bait," the one called Silas said, spitting into the dirt. "Nothing more. Duke Ashworth rides through this pass tomorrow with half his fortune in a strongbox, and he won't leave a Hartley girl to rot in the woods." Eleanor's breath caught. Duke Ashworth, Nathaniel. The name struck her chest like a physical blow, though she fought to keep her face as still as stone. She had not seen him in 4 years, not since her father's debts had driven them from their estate near Kettlebridge, not since she'd watched Nathaniel's carriage disappear down the drive without so much as a backward glance. Or so she'd believed. She had spent 4 years convincing herself that the ache of that parting had dulled. It had not. "He won't come for a girl he's never met," she said aloud, testing the words, testing her captor's certainty as much as her own. The third man, older, with a scar carving through his eyebrow, laughed low in his throat. "That's the beauty of it, miss. He's met you plenty. Word in Kettlebridge is the Duke once near begged your father for your hand, before the money ran dry and your family went quiet as church mice. A man doesn't forget a debt like that. We're not asking him to save a stranger. We're asking him to save his own regret." Eleanor said nothing more, though her mind reeled backward through years she'd sealed away like letters in a locked drawer. She remembered the conservatory at Ashworth Hall, the smell of orange blossom, Nathaniel's low voice promising her a future her father's ruin had made impossible. She remembered believing, foolishly, that love alone might outweigh a ledger book. The Outlaws, 5 in total, she now counted, as 2 more emerged from the tree line dragging a stolen strongbox they had not yet managed to open, made camp around her as the moon rose high and pitiless overhead. She was bound to the trunk of an ancient oak, close enough to the fire to feel its warmth, far enough that no kindness could be mistaken for accident. Silas paced. The scarred man, who the others called Whitlock, seemed to be the one with a plan, and a temper he kept coiled tight as a spring. "The pass narrows 2 miles east," Whitlock said, tracing a line in the dirt with his boot. "His outriders will see nothing until they're already boxed in by the ridge. We take the strongbox, we take the girl as insurance against pursuit, and by dawn, we're 3 counties gone." "And if he doesn't stop for her?" one of the younger men asked. Whitlock's eyes slid to Eleanor, assessing her the way a butcher might assess a hanging side of beef. "Then we've lost nothing we didn't already have, but he'll stop. Men like Ashworth always stop for pretty ruined things they once thought they'd marry." The cruelty of it, spoken so plainly, should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, something colder and sharper took root beneath her fear. An old, humiliated pride. The same pride that had kept her silent when Nathaniel's family had made clear a penniless girl had no place at Ashworth Hall. She would not be reduced to bait, to a debt collected, to a regret made flesh for other men's profit. She began, quietly, to work at the rope. The night deepened. The fire guttered low, and most of the outlaws slept in uneasy shifts, rifles cradled like brides. Only Whitlock remained fully alert, sharpening a knife against a whetstone with slow, deliberate strokes, watching Eleanor across the flames with an expression she could not read. Calculation, certainly, but something else beneath it, something almost like curiosity. "You don't seem frightened enough, Miss Hartley," he said at last. "Would it please you if I wept?" "It would please me if you understood your situation." He set down the whetstone. "The Duke is a proud man. Pride makes men predictable, but it also makes them dangerous when cornered. Tomorrow, when he comes, and he will come, I'd advise you to stay very still and let us do the talking." "And if I don't?" Whitlock smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. "Then we'll discover together what a duke values more, his gold or his girl." Eleanor turned her face toward the dark canopy above, toward the same stars that had once shone over the conservatory at Ashworth Hall, and wondered, with a dread that tangled inseparably with something far more dangerous, something like hope. Whether Nathaniel had truly forgotten her, or whether tomorrow would prove that some debts of the heart were never settled at all. Far to the west, unaware yet of the trap laid for him on the eastern pass, Duke Nathaniel Ashworth rode through the night with his outriders, a folded letter from an old family friend tucked inside his coat. A letter bearing news of Eleanor Hartley's disappearance that had reached him only hours before, and that had already changed the entire shape of his journey. Nathaniel Ashworth had not slept in 2 days, though he would not have called what he felt exhaustion so much as a kind of grim, burning clarity. The letter from Mrs. Pemberton, an old friend of Eleanor's late mother, and one of the few people who still corresponded with the Hartleys since their fall from society, had arrived at Ashworth Hall just after dawn, 2 days prior, and its contents had rearranged everything he thought he understood about his own carefully ordered life. Eleanor taken from the Kettlebridge coaching inn. No ransom demanded. I fear the worst, and I know of no one else who might act swiftly enough to matter. He had read it 3 times before he understood that his hands were shaking. For 4 years, Nathaniel had told himself a story about Eleanor Hartley, that she had chosen silence over him, that her family's disgrace had simply revealed a convenient excuse for her to walk away from a match she'd never truly wanted, that his own father's insistence on breaking the engagement had merely spared him a heartbreak she'd have delivered herself in time. It was a comfortable story. It had let him marry no one else, court no one seriously, and call the resulting solitude a preference rather than a wound. It was, he now understood with the clean brutality of hindsight, almost entirely a lie he had told himself to avoid a harder truth. He had let her go because it was easier than fighting his father, and he had spent 4 years punishing himself for it, without ever admitting as much. His steward, a steady and unimaginative man named Corbett, rode at his side now, along with 6 armed outriders, more than Nathaniel usually traveled with, gathered in haste once word had spread that the notorious Whitlock gang, long a scourge of the eastern trade roads, was suspected in the abduction. "You're certain it's Whitlock's work?" Nathaniel asked, not for the first time. The innkeeper described a scarred man matching his description, "Your Grace," and the timing aligns with reports of the gang moving through the region. If it is him, he'll want something more than a ransom note delivered by post. Whitlock likes theater. He likes an audience. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He had encountered men like Whitlock before, in the years he'd spent overseeing his family's shipping interests along contested trade routes. Men who had learned that cruelty performed publicly bought more fear, and more profit, than cruelty performed quietly. If Whitlock intended to use Eleanor as leverage, it meant the gang already knew, or had guessed, exactly what she once meant to him. That thought alone made him urge his horse faster than was strictly wise on the darkened road. They stopped only once, near midnight, at a tenant farmer's cottage where Corbett had arranged for a change of horses. It was there that a boy of perhaps 12, the farmer's son, breathless from running, arrived with news that reshaped the entire shape of Nathaniel's plan. "Men in the East Woods, sir. My uncle saw their fire from the ridge path. 5 of them, maybe more, camped near the old oak stand by Hartcliffe Pass." "The pass we ride through at dawn," Corbett said quietly. Nathaniel felt something cold settle over him. Not fear, precisely, but a terrible, focusing certainty. "They mean to ambush us there. They want us to walk into it believing we're rescuing her by surprise, when in truth, they've chosen the ground, and the hour." "Then we don't ride through at dawn," Corbett said. "No." Nathaniel was already moving toward the horses. "We go now, in the dark, on foot the last mile, and we take the ground before they expect us to understand we know it's a trap at all." It was a risk that bordered on recklessness, and Nathaniel understood that better than anyone. 6 men against a gang who knew the terrain, moving through unfamiliar woods in darkness, with no guarantee that Eleanor was still unharmed, or even still at the campsite the boy had described. But he understood something else with equal clarity. waiting for dawn, for the safe and sanctioned rescue, for the version of this night that let him arrive as a duke rather than a man, was exactly the kind of caution that had already cost him 4 years of her life, and his own peace besides. "Your Grace," Corbett said carefully, as they dismounted at the edge of the wood to continue on foot. "If this goes wrong, it won't. You don't know that." Nathaniel checked the pistol at his belt, his hands steady now. All the shaking of 2 days burned away into something harder and more useful. "I know that I let her go once because I was afraid of what it would cost me to fight for her. I will not make that particular mistake twice, Corbett, whatever it costs tonight." They moved into the trees in near silence. 6 men and a duke who had, somewhere between Ashworth Hall and this dark wood, stopped thinking of Eleanor Hartley as a debt owed or a regret to be managed, and started thinking of her for the first time in 4 years as simply the thing he most needed to survive the night to protect. Behind them, unseen, a 7th figure detached from the shadows near the tenant cottage and began moving swiftly and silently toward Hartcliffe Pass by a shorter path through the hills. Mrs. Pemberton's own groundskeeper sent ahead hours earlier with a message for anyone who might reach the outlaw camp first, a message that would, before the night was through, change everything. Whitlock believed he understood about the trap he had so carefully laid. Eleanor had freed one wrist by the time the fire burned down to embers, though she kept her arms folded against the tree trunk as if still bound, waiting for a moment when the camp's attention slipped far enough for her to act. She did not yet know what she would do once free. 5 armed men against 1 woman in torn skirts offered no obvious path to safety, but she understood, with the same cold clarity that had carried her through 4 years of genteel poverty, that waiting passively for either rescue or ruin was no plan at all. It was Whitlock who noticed the newcomer first. A figure emerged from the tree line just past midnight, hands raised, moving with the careful, unhurried gait of a man who wanted very much to be seen before he was shot. Silas leveled a rifle at him instantly, and the camp snapped from drowsy watchfulness into sharp alarm. "Easy," the man said. "I've no weapon. I've a message, and I've come alone." "From who?" Whitlock demanded. "From your employer." The stranger, older, weathered, dressed like a groundskeeper rather than a courier, lowered his hand slowly once no one fired. "The one who paid you to take the girl and wait for the Duke. He's changed the terms." Eleanor's stomach turned to ice. Employer. She had assumed, foolishly perhaps, that Whitlock's gang had seized on opportunity alone. A wealthy man's former betrothed, ripe for ransom. She had not considered that someone had arranged her abduction with deliberate purpose, had selected her specifically, had known enough about her history with Nathaniel to weaponize it. Whitlock's expression didn't change, but something in his posture sharpened. Terms were payment on delivery, nothing about changing anything. "He says the Duke's man Corbett is more resourceful than expected, and there's a risk of the ambush failing outright. New terms. Don't wait for the Duke at the pass. Kill the girl now, leave the body where his men will find it easily, and disappear before dawn. He'll pay double for certainty over an ambush that might go wrong." The words landed in the clearing like a struck bell, and for one suspended moment, nobody moved. Eleanor understood in that instant 2 things simultaneously. The first was that she was likely to die within the hour unless something changed. The second, more devastating than the first, was the identity beginning to take shape behind the messenger's words. He says, "He's changed the terms," spoken with a familiarity that suggested this employer was no stranger to Kettlebridge, no random enemy of the Duke's, but someone who understood precisely how much pain it would cause Nathaniel to find her dead, rather than simply lost. "Who?" she said aloud, her voice cutting through the murmur of the gang. "Is paying you?" The messenger's eyes flicked to her, and something like reluctance crossed his weathered face. Reluctance, Eleanor realized with a jolt, rather than indifference, as though the role he played sat uneasily on him. That's not your concern. Miss. It became my concern the moment you arrived to discuss killing me. Whitlock raised a hand for silence, studying the messenger with open suspicion now. I don't like changed terms delivered by a man I've never met, in the dead of night, with no letter and no seal. Any fool with a story can walk into a camp and claim to speak for a paymaster. I've proof, if you'd have it privately. Say it in front of the men. I keep no secrets from my own crew. The messenger hesitated only a heartbeat before he spoke again, and when he did, his next words were not the ones Eleanor braced for. Your paymaster's man Corbett isn't the Duke's steward at all, not truly. He's been feeding your employer information about Ashworth's movements for the better part of a year, in exchange for a share of the shipping contracts once the Duke's estate falls into disorder. Tonight was never meant to end in ransom. It was meant to end in grief so total, the Duke abandons the trade routes his family has held for 3 generations, and your employer buys them out from beneath him for a fraction of their worth. Whitlock went very still. Corbett. The very man riding beside the Duke tonight, the messenger confirmed. The very man who told your employer exactly which pass his grace would take, and exactly when. Eleanor's mind reeled through everything she thought she'd understood about this night. Whitlock's certainty that Nathaniel would come, the precise timing, the pass chosen with such confidence. It had never been a gamble on a Duke's lingering affection at all. It had been engineered, every piece of it, by someone inside Nathaniel's own household. Someone close enough to know the shape of his grief before it had even happened. If Corbett's the one who set this trap, Whitlock said slowly, working through the logic with the wary calculation of a man who disliked being anyone's pawn, then killing the girl serves him, not us. We get a corpse to dispose of, and a fraction of our fee. The Duke, grieving and half-mad, tears apart the countryside looking for someone to blame. And we're the obvious target, not the steward standing at his side offering comfort. That is precisely the arrangement, the messenger said quietly. Whitlock's knife, still in his hand from the earlier whetstone, caught the dying firelight as he turned to look at Eleanor with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not cruelty now, but the cold recalculation of a man realizing he'd been made a tool rather than a partner. I don't fancy being the fool who did another man's murder for half his promised coin, Whitlock said finally, while he keeps his own hands clean and his own steward's position secure. Then what do you propose? Silas asked, uneasy. Whitlock's gaze did not leave Eleanor's face. I propose we find out exactly how much the real Duke Ashworth is willing to pay to learn who's been selling him out from inside his own house. And I propose we let him arrive here believing he's rescuing his lost love, only to discover the far more valuable prize is the traitor riding at his own side. It was, Eleanor understood with a rush of vertigo, the very last outcome she had imagined possible an hour before. Not death, not rescue exactly, but something stranger. Her own captivity becoming, in the space of a few sentences, the bait for an entirely different trap, aimed not at a Duke's fortune, but at the man he trusted most. And somewhere in the dark hills above Hartcliffe Pass, unseen by anyone in the clearing, Nathaniel Ashworth and 6 armed men were closing the last half-mile toward a camp that no longer contained the danger any of them expected, while Corbett, walking silently at the Duke's side with a lantern in one hand and betrayal folded quietly beneath his composed exterior, waited for the moment that would let him finish, at last, what he had spent a year so carefully arranging. The last half-mile passed in near total silence, 6 men moving through undergrowth with the careful discipline of soldiers rather than gentlemen, until the orange glow of the outlaw camp's fire flickered faintly through the trees ahead. Nathaniel raised a hand, and the party stopped as one. There, Corbett whispered, pointing toward the light, just as the boy described. I'll take 2 men around the eastern flank, Your Grace, if you and the others approach from... No. Nathaniel's voice was quiet, but something in it had shifted, hardened, in a way that made Corbett turn to look at him fully. We stay together. All of us. Splitting the party gives us the advantage of surprise from two directions. It also gives whoever wants me isolated in these woods precisely the opportunity they're hoping for. Nathaniel held Corbett's gaze in the darkness, and for the first time in a year of steady, competent service, he watched something flicker behind his steward's composed features. A fractional hesitation, quickly smoothed over, but not quickly enough. Tell me, Corbett, how did the boy at the tenant farm know exactly where to send word, on exactly the night we needed it? And how did Whitlock's gang know exactly which pass I'd take tomorrow, when I only decided that route myself 2 days ago, in a conversation I had with precisely one other person? The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but it told Nathaniel everything the letter from Mrs. Pemberton, the boy's warning, and every mile of this desperate ride had failed to make certain until now. Corbett moved first, but Nathaniel had expected it, and the pistol he'd kept loose in his belt through every mile of the journey was already rising before his steward's own weapon cleared its holster. The shot that rang out through the wood was Nathaniel's, and it took the pistol from Corbett's hand rather than his life, though the scream of pain that followed was enough to have every man in Whitlock's distant camp on his feet within seconds. "You'll hang for this," Nathaniel said, standing over the man who had shared his table and his confidence for a year, clutching a shattered hand. "Every shipping contract, every route you sold to whoever's paying you, you'll answer for all of it. But first you'll tell me who hired Whitlock's gang, and you'll tell me now, because I have very little patience left tonight for anything that delays me from reaching Eleanor Hartley." What Corbett gasped out, through gritted teeth and the particular desperation of a man realizing his careful year of betrayal had collapsed in a single instant, was a name that meant nothing to Eleanor and everything to Nathaniel. A rival shipping family from the northern ports, longtime competitors of Ashworth's trade interests, who had calculated that a duke destroyed by grief would abandon contracts a duke thinking clearly never would. There was no time to feel the full weight of the betrayal. Nathaniel left 2 men to bind Corbett, and left the rest to follow him at a run toward the firelight ahead, arriving at the edge of Whitlock's camp, not as a duke walking into a trap sprung by strangers, but as a man who understood, finally and completely, exactly what he was walking into, and exactly what he refused to lose. What he found in the clearing was not the ambush he'd braced for. Whitlock stood with his knife lowered, not raised, and Eleanor, free of her ropes entirely, Nathaniel saw with a jolt of disbelieving relief, stood near the fire with her chin high and her eyes fixed on the tree line, as though she had known, somehow, exactly which direction to watch. "Your Grace," Whitlock said, with the wary formality of a man renegotiating his own survival, "I believe you and I have both been made fools of tonight by the same absent hand. I propose we discuss terms before anyone does something neither of us can take back." It took the better part of an hour, tense, careful, conducted with pistols still drawn on both sides, for Whitlock to lay out everything the false messenger had revealed, and for Nathaniel to understand the full shape of the conspiracy that had nearly cost him both his fortune and the woman he'd spent 4 years failing to admit he still loved. In the end, Whitlock and his men melted back into the trees before dawn, their debt to their true paymaster unpaid, and their appetite for further involvement in a duke's private war entirely extinguished. Not forgiven, not trusted, but no longer, in that moment, an enemy either of them could afford to fight. And then, at last, there was only Eleanor. "You came," she said, when the outlaws had gone, and the fire had burned down to its last embers, and the 6 years of pride and silence between them suddenly felt very small against the space of the last few hours. "I should have come 4 years ago," Nathaniel said. "I told myself 100 reasons why I let you go, and every one of them was a lie I built to avoid admitting the truth, that I was afraid of what it would cost to fight for you, and so I let it cost me you instead. And now? Now I find I'd rather lose every contract, every route, every shilling my family has ever earned, than spend 1 more year pretending I don't love you." He crossed the clearing and took her freed hands in his, marveling that they were whole, that she was here, that the worst version of this night had not come to pass. They sold you as bait to lure a grieving fool into losing everything that mattered to him. Instead, they handed me back the one thing I never should have let go of in the first place. Eleanor, who had spent the longest night of her life bound to a tree and bargained over like cargo, found that the tears she'd refused to shed for her captors came easily now, in the ordinary, overwhelming relief of a man's arms around her at last. "Then perhaps," she said against his shoulder, "some debts of the heart really are worth collecting, however long they're left unpaid." Above them, the first gray light of dawn began to touch the tops of the ancient oaks of Heartcliff Pass. Not the dawn the conspirators had planned for, nor the ambush Whitlock had once believed he was staging, but simply the quiet, ordinary beginning of a day neither Nathaniel nor Eleanor had truly expected to see together, and one that neither of them intended ever again to take for granted.